John Duarte.
Thank you, Trent. Thank you. Thank you for coming. What a great meeting we're having. I love the stories. I love everyone getting up here and kind of telling their story, their perspective. Today's more about solutions. Yesterday was about challenges to production. Today is more about solutions and, what do we call it? Champions of abundance. You know, we are the champions of abundance. Only through abundance that we can improve lives. It's a huge moral argument we're making here. They want to frame us as something else. That's up to them. But we feed people, we feed the world, and it's very urgent at this time that we continue to feed people abundantly here in America, because this, especially in this area of California, this is where food comes from. This is where the horticultural crops are grown, and we are pushing back scarcity and bringing forward abundance. This presentation centers around a pro-human ecology. We are ecologists. I'm almost giving up on the word environmentalist. That's an ideology. Ecology is applying science in a balanced way so that we can prosper and thrive as humans and not get caught up in one ideology or another. And we're seeing here through the stories, when you push back food producers, when you take cattlemen off their rangeland, when you bust a guy for growing wheat in a wheat field during a global food shortage, you are practicing, the government is practicing, an anti-human environmentalism. It's an activism that causes hunger, and it is the most amoral, absurd thing that we could imagine. So let's look at some amoral absurdities and think about what our solutions to it are. Most of those solutions, I just had Mark Massing tell me a story, called it the court of last resort. We can lose in the federal courts, but public opinion is the court of last resort. And that's what we need to get better at appealing to. Whether we win or lose in the federal courts, these bureaucrats might go on doing what they did yesterday, again in the future, if we don't have public opinion with us and if we don't find a way to talk to the public about the importance of what we do to them. So here's this chart. We're revisiting this chart. Let's think about our public message. The bottom 20% of Americans income-wise are spending over 30% of their annual income on food. The bottom 40%, you can see there, they're spending close to 20, well, on average, the bottom 40% are spending about 25% of their annual income on food. Then they can go in California here because of our housing shortage, because we're not developing the water resources we need, and we have what's called quote-unquote smart growth policies that means no growth. They're spending 35% of their money on housing. That doesn't leave much at the end of the day for everything else we need to survive and thrive in the world. This is the American food security programs, food stamps, and all the other programs that help people buy food, because we're not keeping it abundant enough and we're not creating enough opportunity in America to let them earn the money they need to buy the foods that nourish them in the free market. So I would tell poor Americans, as the American food programs expand and seem to stay expanded and expand some more, if you like your public urban schools, you're going to love public food systems. If you want school choice, you probably want food choice also. These are the same themes. We have support for charter schools. We have the ability to get support for free market food system. Now, I got busted for planting wheat in a wheat field. This is the Russian wheat production by year in the 1,000 metric tons. It's going up, and you can see in very recent history from 2012 until this year, Russian wheat production is going way up. Remember those maps I showed yesterday with the little bubbles of trade and imports and exports? That yellow donut is 2008, where those maps are from. Here's what's happening with what Russian wheat exports by year. They're taking over the world grain export markets because we're choosing not to produce these foods ourselves. This is from 1981. You can say, well, who cares? It's grain. Grain's not a national security issue. Grain's not a global influencer. In 1980, Russia invaded Afghanistan, remember? We didn't participate in their Olympics because of it. In 1981, we embargoed them and didn't sell them grain for geopolitical reasons. We are now letting them take over the world grain market, as we were 10 years ago letting them take over the natural gas markets into Europe, and we had very limited options until we made abundant energy security in America and were able to supply Europe with natural gas. We are now letting Russia take over the global grain market and have geopolitical influence through food supply. So here's the United States wheat trade exports by year. We're going down. There's 1981, that's the embargo, and since then we're down. Here's the, that's where I got busted for planting wheat in a wheat field right there. That was a global food crisis. That is where we had tortilla riots in Mexico. We had food inflation here in America with zero wage growth. We had the Arab Spring pop up because of food inflation. Popped up so high that it created instability in the Middle East. And here we are planting wheat in a wheat field that was farmed back in the 80s when prices were high previously, and getting called out by the Army Corps of Engineers. I had to settle for a $1.1 million fine. I'll update the case a little bit more thoroughly in a few minutes. This is why. This is a typical vernal pool. This is from the government expert reports. This is the wetland that I was accused of farming through, one of the many wetlands. This is typical of them, that I was accused of farming through. I tilled the ground 5 to 7 inches by the government's own report. And this is what they came after me for $45 million in fines. So this is a timeline. You know, we planted wheat in 2012. In 2013, we received a letter from the Army Corps of Engineers. They saw us, we have evidence now, they saw the equipment move on the property in October of 2012. We cultivated the land in November of 2012 after we got a little bit of rain, so we could actually get some tillage. It was very dry and compacted after 20 years of cattle grazing. And they photographed the equipment moved in. They saw us tilling it in 2012, about 4 or 5 weeks after the equipment moved in, and sent me a letter to cease and desist in February of 2013. They had no interest in protecting these wetlands whatsoever. This was simply a shakedown racket on the part of government agencies. We sent back a letter to them through our local attorney, said, please, under FOIA, give us all the information you have. Why do you think we're deep ripping? Give us a hearing, meet us out at the field, let's engage this. You guys are very, very wrong. They kicked us up to enforcement. The Pacific Legal Foundation then said, hey, if they've sent you a cease and desist and they won't even give you a hearing, there's major due process causes here. There's major different Fifth Amendment right to due process actions available here. So the Pacific Legal Foundation sent them, sued them basically on our behalf for a Fifth Amendment due process claim. Only then did they counterclaim us with a destruction of wetland suit. They weren't getting their money. They're going to show us that you can't stand up to the government and get due process. In 14, they fired a counterclaim. The gentleman up north who did our tillage work for us, it was a local operator we hired in, asked him, why you guys, they were going to his house and calling him on the phone, he asked him, why are you suing the Duartes anyways? Well, the Army Corps of Engineers attorney, and this is in deposition, this isn't hearsay, attorney, and it's unchallenged in deposition, the attorney told him, well, they're suing us, so we're suing them back. So now we have a First Amendment retaliatory lawsuit claim against the government. We've got a First Amendment retaliatory lawsuit, freedom of speech claim, and a Fifth Amendment due process claim. They then, it goes on, and the first judge we had was very much in our favor. The second, he retired and passed away. The second judge was an Obama-appointed progressive. I'll get in trouble with my lawyers, but Kimberly Mueller, the state of Jefferson folks here locally are dealing with her now up in the federal court. It's not going well. In some of the hearings and stuff, you know, get me a beer and I'll tell you some of the other cases I saw reviewed by her in her courtroom. Insanity unleashed. So anyways, summary judgment against Duarte, called us in. We had a trial scheduled last year in August. We were supposed to go to trial. Before trial, the judge dismissed the updated status of the vernal pools evidence. Basically, we sent our biologists out there to survey the vernal pools and give a report what their health is. Their health was excellent. The natural vernal pool wetland flora was all reestablished. The Army Corps of Engineers Department of Justice group was never denied access to our property at any time. They had full access to our property anytime they requested to go out and take evidence and collect evidence. We thought once they did that, they'd go away, but that didn't work. They'd already decided we had to be punished for standing up to them. And so we hoped that after that evidence was dismissed, they dismissed evidence that our company couldn't pay $40 million or $45 million in mitigation costs and penalties without bankrupting us. She dismissed all of our current financial information. We had to settle. My attorneys, both the PLF and my private attorneys, were telling me, if you go in her courtroom, she may not even let you put on a defense. This judge may write an opinion that finds so much fact and law that it's going to be bad for property owners nationwide. You can't do any good from here. You have to settle. So we ended up settling. The next place to pursue this is going to be with Congressional Review Act hearings in the Capitol. We need Washington, D.C., Senate, and Congress to take interest in Congressional Review Act hearings on this prosecution. A lot of your government worked. This was, I attribute the failure of our ability to reach an appealable settlement. We said, fine, we'll settle. Hit me with $500,000. Hit me with $250,000 in penalties. We're going to win on appeal. That's no problem. Just give us a settlement. We'll pay a penalty and let us appeal this on jurisdictionality of the wetlands. Let us appeal it on the due process case. At one point they claimed sovereign immunity. We couldn't sue them because the government enjoyed sovereign immunity. That's an old common law reference to the times of kings in England, where it basically means you can't sue the king, dumbass, you're a subject. Now, there's nothing more constitutionally problematic than a government claiming sovereign immunity against a constitutional rights lawsuit. It's insane. But all of that needs to be looked at. All of that needs to be reviewed by Congress because they are being shirked. What does the Clean Water Act say? It says, normal farming practices and ranching activities such as plowing from regulation, it's exempted. Normal farming practices are broadly exempted in the Clean Water Act. And in 1980, they revisited it again when they did the 404 permitting process, which is the permit the Army Corps is telling me I needed to get before I could plant wheat in a wheat field. It says, plowing will never involve a discharge of dredge or fill material unless it actually converts wetlands to dry land. Well, these vernal pool wetlands were mapped. They were mapped by consultants in 1994. In 2012, they were mapped again before we bought the property. It had a wetland delineation on it. We knew they were there. And in 2015, they were mapped again. So the green line is right before our tillage. The red line's right after our tillage. There was no conversion of wetlands to dry land. What the real issue is, and we see our Center for Biological Diversity friends are outside and they're noticing us today, which is fine. It's within the boundaries of a vernal pool recovery area, a critical habitat for fairy shrimp. Now, fairy shrimp are sea monkeys. If you ever read comic books as a kid, you looked at the back, they're trying to sell you these little sea monkeys that look like some little society of small creatures. That's what fairy shrimp are. You can put them in a Kool-Aid packet, dry, store them on your shelf for 10 years, hydrate them, and they'll swim around again. That's what fairy shrimp are. They've survived several ice ages. They will survive wheat fields. They have survived wheat fields. But that's not the issue. The issue is they want to bring this into a habitat preserve. We have a habitat preserve, and I wouldn't even compare myself to the Hammond family, but there are themes that connect here. There's a 3,000-acre habitat preserve just west of us, and this 2,000 acres that we bought, we sold off 1,500 acres. I think it was within their gun sights to turn that into a permanent mitigation land. Wheat markets be damned. Now, this is a team of government experts out here. They spent 10 experts spent 2 weeks surveying the field. Now, in rural America, we've got opioid crisis. We've got sometimes methamphetamine. We hear less about that these days. This is a whole new kind of rural drug ring, dope ring. These guys are literally digging up 36-inch deep holes in the middle of 20 vernal pools that I tilled 5 to 7 inches to plant wheat. with an excavator to come back and prove that the vernal pools were damaged by my 5 to 7 inch tillage. They dug it up with an excavator, looked at it, stood around it. It's almost worth looking at them again. Thought about getting back to the Golden Corral for lunch, and there they are, digging them up. Now, did anyone read Dr. Seuss's Horton, Here's a Who? I think this is an excerpt. If these plant associations were compared to neighborhoods of people in a small town, then the tillage could be compared to a tornado that blows in and completely uproots and rearranges the entire functioning community of neighborhoods. The furrow tops now serve as small mountain ranges, microtopographic high spots. This is your government. Now, the Clean Water Act says nothing about if part of an ongoing farming operation. The agency's added if part of an ongoing farming operation, and zero impact. If not, you have to have zero impacts on any wetlands. Well, you can't farm if you have to grow wheat when wheat's unprofitable. If wheat was profitable in the 80s and you farmed wheat and you grazed it for 2 decades because the wheat markets were through the floor, anybody who grows wheat when they're going to lose their property growing wheat will not own the property. It's not possible. You've got to respond to markets. Oh, I wish I could read this better. This is the judge. This is why we couldn't go forward. If this type of language was used as court precedent in a legal case, farmers all over America would be subject to this as a precedent. And listen to this. The United States motion for summary judgment sets forth extensive and incontrovertible evidence that earthen material moved vertically as the forceful dragging of shanks brought material up from below the surface, moved horizontally as the shanks created furrows and ridges, and moved forward from adjoining areas, including from uplands into wetlands. Based on those facts, Duarte's activities fit the regulations. Give an example of what is not plowing. Okay. The redistribution of surface materials by blading, grading, or other means to fill in wetland areas. This would apply to prairie potholes. This would apply to every low spot in the field under the WOTUS definitions of what you can't farm. How many of you grow field crops, corn, wheat, soy? You can't afford to do the same delineation and flagging and consultancy for all your tillage operations growing field crops as would be required to avoid these low spots. If you step out of production because you want to graze, because you want to fallow, because you want to put in a duck club or a pheasant club for a few years, you will lose your ability to till through the low spots in your field. This thing going forward without ability to appeal would have been a disaster for American agriculture. Here's the wheat market. That's what was grown early in the year, once upon a time in the 80s. This farm. Here's where we farmed it, and if you extend the graph, which I did in other graphs, here it is down here. Here's Wayne Haig. How about that? That's a good friend of ours, right? He's in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago. He looks like he's having some relief and some success, and we really appreciate it. So he's being busted for grazing cattle on BLM ground that's been grazed for generations. Here we are. That's American China beef and veal production by year. They're going up. China's producing more beef and veal than they've produced in a long time. Here's China beef and veal imports by year. Look what's happening. What's that lowest 20% of American? That lowest 20% of American income-wise, we stated this yesterday, has about a $13,000 annual purchasing power parity in GDP. The average Chinese today has $17,000, and it's going up by 7% a year. Americans are going to be competing for scarce food products in the near future, and this is happening now. You look back, it's flat. I think they just opened up some trade opportunities for beef into China, but we looked at a whole number of products yesterday, walnuts, almonds, going into China at rates and volumes they haven't gone through before. Our working class America is heading for a suburban food desert. We've heard a lot about urban food deserts in the last 10 or 20 years. we are heading for suburban food deserts. When you look at the kind of variety and choice that Americans have today and have had and are used to, that will diminish if we do not keep an abundance-oriented ecology versus a scarcity-driven environmentalism in our food production systems. And I believe that's a solution because I think that's what we need to be selling. Things are changing fast. Farm Bureau's always had their food checkoff day somewhere in March. Well, the food checkoff day for a poor American is not in March. A food checkoff day is pushed well into the year. And you combine that with housing costs, because we're constraining resources for housing just like we're constraining resources for food. Working class Americans are going to have a lower standard of living in the near future as these resources are and products are competed for from other countries. So that's the update. I know there might be more interest in my saga with the lawsuit, so I'll take questions from here.
Questions? Debbie? Once again, stand up, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and I hold the mic.
Good morning. I'm Debbie Bajikaluki. I'm a sixth-generation cattle rancher in Siskiyou County, state of Jefferson, where we are the largest dam destruction project in worldwide history is happening in Klamath based on an endangered coho salmon that you could buy in Whole Foods for $8.99.
And you said dam destruction.
Destruction.
Yes.
Yes, where they will breach the dams using Prop 1 money and send 20 million cubic yards of pollutants out to a supposed rising sea. So my question, John, is there are a lot of water issues in California, but if you look at our history, we've always had water issues. If we looked at the big picture of California, there are water issues from the north part of the state down to the south part of the state. How do we bring the entire state together to get the big picture of what's going on with our water issues versus little fights here and there?
Yeah. Again, that goes right back to scarcity versus abundance. When there is scarcity, when the pie is holding the same while the population grows or demand grows, people fight. They get jealous. They protect what's theirs. When you have an abundant strategy, you can bring people together because you're growing the pie. There's going to be enough for everybody. Nobody needs to worry. We are choosing to have a water crisis in California. We talked yesterday, if we thin the forest, Zach Gerber stood up here, if we thin the forests, we get more groundwater. Our groundwater, our forests, our millions and millions of acres of beautiful forests are unhealthy. They need thinning. The trees are killing off each other. You can see the orange trees drying up in the Sierra Nevadas and probably up in the Trinity Forest also. They're overgrown. If we thin them, more water percolates into the ground, more water runs off, let's get sucked up into forests that end up burning in forest fires and destroying all that value. We got to take our flood control dams. The Army Corps of Engineers colonel in a meeting here 3-4 years ago that a local Congressman Jeff Denham hosted at the Farm Bureau office, I asked him, why is it the only time you guys don't believe in global warming is when it comes to emptying the dams before the rain season? We're never going to have another snowpack again, but every year you dump the dams out. He said the solution to that is put bigger spill capacity in the dams. Put a bigger hole in them, make sure the channels drain faster. We can then hold more water in all the flood control dams that we have already. Go north of Sacramento. You fly over it, there's a tree ring north of Sacramento where no one's planting orchard crops into the rice ground because the water table's too high. That's $10 an acre foot water that could be pulled out there and put in the Sacramento River and sent into California. So again, I believe that we have a deliberate scarcity strategy in California water. There are a lot of solutions. I don't know everything. There's a few dams going up. The Sites Reservoir looks like it's got potential, but there are really easy solutions. Simply don't flood the water out the Delta for a bucket full of Delta smelt. We're destroying the California ag economy and rural economy as well as constraining Southern California's landscaping, which I like lawns, I like parks, I like golf courses, to save as many Delta smelt as you could raise in a toilet in 1 year. It's ludicrous. And so these are deliberate water scarcity choices we're making in California. If we had an abundant strategy, we'd have a lot less jealousy and a lot less competition if you have abundance. Thank you. Thank you very much.